on the Obama's approval ratings. He's doing pretty well overall, but the one area that he's not doing so well in is 53% disapprove of his actions in regards to the federal budget deficit. I want to bring to your attention Bruce Bartlett's piece on this. He is a former advisor to Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, and we had him on the show, and he says he's conservative, but you have to judge facts for what they are, and tax cuts make sense sometimes. It does in other cases. He's a very, very reasonable guy, and by all, from everything that I can say, I think he's actually an excellent economist from the analysis I've seen of his. So he wrote a piece saying, hey, look, we got to look at the real numbers here. If you look at the real numbers, they tell you a totally different picture than what is conventional wisdom. So I'm going to throw a couple of numbers at you here, but I think they're important. So let me be as clear as I can on them. First, he says, look, you can't just look at the deficit and say it's Obama's fault. Let's break it down into two categories. What was the deficit before Obama came in, and what is it after him? Okay, you can't argue with that. That makes perfect sense, right? And he says the projection in January of 2009, according to the Congressional Budget Office, before Obama came in, was that we would have $3.543 billion in outlays, but $2.357 billion in revenues coming in. So, bottom line, as Obama's coming in, we have a $1.186 billion deficit. Okay, so let's round up a little bit just to make it simpler. He's coming in, the revenues are not meeting our expenditures. He's in a $1.2 billion hole. Okay, so now after he came in, what happened? Well, at the end of the fiscal year of 2009, which actually happens in September 30th because of the way they do their accounting, the deficit was not the projected $1.2 billion when he came in. It was actually $1.4 billion. So, hey, okay, 200 some odd million dollars more onto the deficit. So then you say, all right, well, do you at least pin that on Obama? So Bruce Bartlett breaks down the numbers a little more. And he says, all right, well, so let's figure out where that deficit came in, the extra deficit of $223 billion, right? Well, he says $28 billion was spending, but $251 billion was less than expected revenue. Okay, now if you kept all those numbers in your head, the extra deficit was only $223 billion. The money we lost on revenue was $251 billion. So that's actually a higher number, right? And he says from that you can conclude that in fact the increase in the deficit since January is 100% not because of higher spending, but because of lower revenues. And one of the reasons we got lower revenues is because Obama followed Bush's path, and at least for 95% of the country, not for the top 5%, but for the rest of us, in cutting taxes. So he says now the Republican proposal is, if he just cut taxes. But first of all, he did cut taxes. And tax cuts, unfortunately in this case, reduced revenue in fiscal year 2009 by $98 billion. So they didn't help our deficit. They might have helped stimulate the economy. You can have an argument about that, but they didn't help the deficit. And now the other part of the revenues being lower is, of course, because we're in a deep recession. So in the end, look, at the worst case scenario, you say, wow, you know what, Obama should have improved the economy and he should have found a way to increase the revenue anyway. He's the president. It's all on him. Okay, then he's responsible for $223 billion higher deficit, right? But definitely not $1.4 billion, because the $1.2 billion was in the beginning when he came in, right? But if you look at it reasonably, it's really that we've lost revenue because of the recession and because of the tax cuts, and that the extra spending didn't contribute to that, depending on how you look at the numbers, at all. So don't believe the hype when you hear people say, oh, Obama, man, $1.4 billion deficit. $1.2 billion is George Bush's, and we lost the extra $200 billion because of less revenue, not because we spent more. Okay, know the facts. Bruce Bartlett does a great job in explaining them here.
Watch the live show at theyoungturks.com.